This video is brought to you by Brilliant. If you look at a list of countries by GDP per capita, Ireland ranks as one of the richest nations in the world. According to the IMF, for example, in 2023, Ireland's GDP per capita is $145,000, the highest in the world and nearly triple that of the UK. The World Bank puts it slightly lower at $106,000, but that still puts Ireland in third place after just Luxembourg and Singapore, and implies that Ireland is, in per capita terms, twice as wealthy as the UK. If this wasn't impressive enough, Ireland is also the fastest growing economy in the EU by quite some distance. According to the World Bank, Ireland's GDP grew by an astonishing 12.2% last year, and Ireland's 3.5% growth in the final quarter of 2022, equivalent to an annual growth rate of about 15%, single-handedly kept the Eurozone out of recession. Unsurprisingly, these figures have provoked a bit of scepticism. Obviously, Ireland's a lovely place, but it doesn't exude wealth in the same way as, say, Luxembourg or Hong Kong. And it's hard to believe it's the wealthiest country in the world. So, in this video, we're going to have a look into Ireland's impressive GDP figures, how Ireland has achieved such rapid economic growth, and whether we can really trust the data. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. To understand quite how impressive Ireland's GDP figures are, we need to start with a bit of history. For most of recent history, Ireland's economic prospects were limited by population decline and deindustrialisation under British rule. Prior to the Great Famine of the 1840s, there were roughly 8.2 million people living in Ireland, but a combination of economic misery and mass emigration means its population has never returned to this level since. From its independence in 1922 up until the 1960s, Ireland went through a further period of economic stagnation marked by heavy emigration. On average, over 40,000 people left the country every year from 1946 to 1957, resulting in population decline to a record low of 2.8 million. During that time, the economy was highly protectionist, with elevated tariff barriers, and Ireland soon became one of the poorest countries in Western Europe. There was a brief period of respite in the 1960s, when the country began to shift away from a rural agrarian economy to a more service-based economy, thanks to effective interventionist policies by the Irish government, especially in infrastructure and higher education, and a more open economy, which allowed for trading relations with other European countries as well as the UK. Unfortunately, Ireland, like much of Europe, was badly affected by the oil crisis of the 70s. Growth slowed, and Ireland became beset by industrial strikes and political crises. Governments were constantly collapsing, with power alternating between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and neither government was very good at managing the economy. In the early 80s, growth slowed to about 2%, and Ireland became known as the sick man of Europe. For example, in 1985, Ireland's GDP per capita was about $6,000 in current USD, compared to about $9,000 in France, Germany, and the UK. It was really in the 90s that Ireland became the economic miracle that we see today. Ireland's GDP per capita began converging towards its European neighbours and accelerated in the late 90s. From 1995 to 2000, Ireland's growth averaged 9.4%, and in 2001, it had the highest GDP per capita in Western Europe, earning it the nickname the Celtic Tiger. While there have been some occasional hiccups, Ireland's rapid growth has basically continued, and as we mentioned in the intro, Ireland is now apparently one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Ireland's economy was helped by its membership of the EU, which has invested billions of dollars in Irish infrastructure, and the Eurozone, which prompted a credit boom in the 2000s. However, the main reason for Ireland's rapid GDP growth is its pro-business policies. Ireland's open economy, functioning legal system, and super low corporation tax rate have made it the tax haven of choice for Western multinationals. Ireland is the main base in Europe for US companies, in particular from the IT and pharmaceutical sectors. In recent years, Google, Meta, Yahoo, eBay, and Amazon have all set up shop in Ireland to serve Europe. Unfortunately, the presence of these multinationals distort Ireland's real wealth. The main reason for this is how GDP is measured. Essentially, GDP is meant to measure a country's productive capacity by summing four things: government spending, household consumption investment, and the difference between exports and imports. In practice, more exports means higher GDP. However, GDP doesn't really distinguish between different types of exports. To take advantage of Ireland's low corporation tax rate, many multinational companies claim that most of their business takes the form of exports from the Irish subsidiaries. The precise mechanism is a bit complicated, but the basic idea is that when, say, Apple sells an iPhone, it claims that most of the value comes from research and development operations in Ireland. In other words, despite the fact that an iPhone is designed in California and built in China, when you buy one, most of the money goes to Apple's Irish subsidiary. This is why, in 2018, the IMF calculated that a quarter of Ireland's growth was actually down to iPhone sales. Multinationals also inflate Ireland's investment rate because when they move money about between their various subsidiaries, it counts as foreign direct investment, even though it's actually just an accounting gimmick. In 2019, the IMF estimated that 60% of Irish foreign direct investment was, quote, phantom. Anyway, this is why Ireland's former central banker Patrick Honohan argues that we should ignore these two components of GDP when measuring Ireland's wealth, and just focus on household consumption and spending by the government on public services. By this measure, Ireland ranks just slightly below the EU average, below countries like Luxembourg or Denmark, but above EU nations like Spain, Poland, and Portugal. Obviously, this is still impressive. It means that Ireland is a prosperous European country with stable institutions, but it's definitely not the wealthiest country in the world. All in all, while its GDP might be overstated, and Ireland is probably closer to New Zealand or Italy than to Switzerland or Norway, it's still a prosperous European country, which is really impressive given its economic history. What do the world's best politicians have in common? They're willing to learn something new every day. And if you think that sounds too hard or too time-consuming, or even just too overwhelming for you to do, then you haven't tried Brilliant.org. Brilliant.org is the best way to learn maths and computer science in a fun and interactive way. That's because Brilliant has literally thousands of lessons, from foundational and advanced maths to skills crucial in the modern world, like AI, data science, neural networks, and more, with new lessons added monthly. Like I said though, the real value here is that you can do this easily every day, truly committing to lifelong learning. Slowly, over time, you'll not only pick up new skills or get better at maths, but you'll also feel the satisfaction that comes with bettering yourself and staying ahead. To try everything Brilliant has to offer, free for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description. Plus, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription.